Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Eric Roy, founder and CEO of Surf's Up Franchising, a fast casual seafood restaurant with a relaxed atmosphere and delicious Southern-inspired recipes, including fried green tomatoes, fried lobster, catfish, and shrimp. Started in 2012, it has since grown to 8 locations. They provide catering services and accommodate private events. And together, we'll hear how he was able to first make the transition from the inner city of Chicago to a tax accountant, and later to starting a chain of seafood restaurants. Before we get into the good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year to their bottom line by implementing one of our proprietary programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now back to our guest today, the CEO of Surf's Up Franchising, Eric. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Well, thank you for having me, Anthony. I appreciate it.
So, Eric, let's start at the beginning. I want to hear about maybe some of the challenging circumstances that you had to overcome living in the inner city of Chicago to going to college and becoming a tax accountant. Can you kind of paint a picture of what that arc looked like?
Yeah, so I was grew up in the Lawndale area of Chicago early on. I mean, it was it's funny because now looking back that I've kind of like been away a little bit for a while. I still have a lot of family on the west side of Chicago. I'm in the suburbs now, but looking back, I can see the difference. But when I was coming up, and I really didn't know any difference. I had a lot of love in my family. So, I didn't know if it was any different from, me growing up there or me growing up, in the White House or anything else. We had a big family, a lot of love on both sides. My parents, they had me. My mom was 16 to 17 when she had me, and my father was probably like 18 to 19. So they were young, but my dad, he loved his family. He worked his job. He worked at the United States Post Office. He started around then after I was born, and he stayed there until he retired. And then he helped put my mom through school. And, she always was really big on education. So she became a nurse. And, and as they did better, we kind of like moved on to better apartments, then eventually moved out of the Lawndale area into the suburbs, moved out into Oak Park, then eventually they bought a house in Maywood. So, I was able to kind of get away. One of my biggest challenges was when I was, and I was a little older. I was probably like 14 or 15. And I got, I was actually in the library, a couple of my friends goofing off. I got kicked out of the library, was walking. But while we were in the library, it was a group of guys kind of like started hanging out. And we were leaving the library on our way. I was just going to the store. I was really just going to take a break for a minute and then come back to the library and pick up my friend. A group of guys followed me down to the store and jumped on me. So, they kind of sparked something up with me, jumped on me. It's probably about 8 or 9 of them. And they like hit me in the face with a brick. They broke my nose. They broke the bridge right over my eye right here. So I had like stitches here. And, but that was a turning point in my life, because after that, before that, I was, on the basketball team, getting straight A's. I was still, and I kind of maintained that. I left the basketball team. But then after that, I started to spend more time back in the city with my cousins, because this was after I moved from the city into the suburbs and kind of like was new on the block. That's kind of like, I didn't know everybody, so that's kind of how it happened. But then that drove me back to the city, and then maybe like almost a year later, I got my license. My parents got me a car, so I was constantly back in the city, with my cousins. And my cousins, they kind of were raised a little differently, and and that kind of like sent me in a different direction for a few years. So that was like a big challenge that I had to overcome. And it got to the point where I was able to kind of really think about it and go back to that point and kind of, try to switch it up, so that I can go into a more positive direction. I say like
So
that.
you were in the suburbs when you got jumped by
Yeah,
that
I
group
was
of 8 or
actually
9
in the
guys?
suburb. Yeah, in the suburbs then. So
So
I
you were in the
moved
place
from the
where you
city.
thought you were supposed to be safe,
Yeah, I mean,
safer.
yeah, and it was, and it was safe up until, up until that point. I guess I was like the new guy on the block. It wasn't the people on my block that did it. It was some guys, a few blocks away that, just a group of so-called bad guys that, that started hanging out. And, I guess that's what they were doing. But, that kind of sent me in a situation where, I wasn't so focused on school anymore, even though I still did well enough to graduate and eventually go to U of I. But I just wasn't focused like I was. I was really mentally, kind of like thinking about that a lot. You know what I mean? So I kind of changed. Instead of me, focusing on school and the basketball team, went over and started spending more time with my cousins and everything. My cousins, these were some pretty tough guys. So I started spending time with them and meeting their friends, and started hanging out more back in the in the neighborhood.
And so, am I hearing you correctly that maybe that was a direction that wasn't entirely good or productive for you?
I learned a lot, right? Like the school of hard knocks, but and that's what I did. Like when my son was coming up. So my son right now, he's one of the VPs of product at JP Morgan. But that was one thing that I focused on. He's 31 now, but I focused on and made sure that he didn't have to deal with the situation that I dealt with. I made sure that he was safe, because I know when all the time when I was safe, I was good. When I all of a sudden wasn't safe, that kind of made me go back to, now I want to be this tough guy. You know what I mean? Because I'm kind of like trying to save face. So, and that's why I made sure that my son and my nephew didn't have to deal with that. We kind of like tried to make sure, and, my parents, them and my sister as well, we always really tried to really make sure that the boys were safe, because, it's tough coming up in the inner city, African American, and even in our situation, we were living in the suburbs, but our whole family was in the city. So we would still go back and forth, And so once that happened, I really spent in it. I was still sleeping at home at my parents' house, but I spent 80-90% of my daytime after school, like in the city, and kind of like back in the city, wanting to be a tough guy for a minute.
And so, what was it that kind of got you back on a better track? Was it going to the University of Illinois?
Well,
Was it going back to
yeah,
college?
that was part of it, and then so I had my son at 18. Then I had the one that's at JP Morgan. Then I had my oldest daughter at 20, and that's the one that went to Ohio State. So I was a young father, just like my father was. And so that was part of it, having my children. And then I was able to get away and go to U of I and kind of like meet some different friends also, and kind of give myself a little space. But U of I, it's 2 hours from Chicago, so I found that still wasn't enough space. So my son, because everybody, it's you're in U of I at Champaign, but it's kind of like an extension of Chicago. Um, Really good school, but I mean, so I still wasn't all the way, because I would still come back home a lot. You know what I mean? But just growing up and maturing, you know what I mean. Had a couple, near death type of incidents. You know what I mean. I got robbed, and a couple things happened that really kind of like forced me to sit back and kind of like really think and see, okay, how did I get to this point? Because everything was going perfectly, wasn't doing too well in school, and just through that reflecting and just maturing and having my children, I came back home to Chicago for a minute and left U of I, and then ultimately was able to go back and instead of being it, because my mother, she was a nurse, so she wanted me to be a doctor. So she always pushed me, to be a doctor, And I felt like it sounds cool. I was good in math, like science. So I originally went to U of I for chemistry, and then after I dropped out, when I went back, I had changed my whole major to accounting. So I had to go like an additional. I'd already been there like 3 years. I had to go an additional 3 years to get the accounting degree. So all of that just kind of like mixed up together, and I had to go back to when the incident happened to really understand where I need to go. Just to understand how what sent me on that tangent.
So it wasn't one near-death experience, it was a couple of them, and then sort of a slow evolution, a slow burn from there that kind of had you take stock of your life and, hey,
Yeah,
how did I get on this path, and where do I want to be?
yeah. It was one was a car accident. We went to visit one of my friends at Lewis University, and we were driving back. Me and a couple of these same guys we were hanging with, and we're goofing off and everything. We're on the expressway. One of the guys from the back seat jumped and grabbed the steering wheel and like just turned us into the median. So that was one thing, and then I got robbed at gunpoint, and that was another. So those two things really kind of like if you start to think about stuff, right? You got to sit down and kind of like, okay, this isn't working. It's time to do something new. And I was always smart enough to be able to step outside myself and kind of see what I was doing. You know what I mean? And just so I can change.
And so you went on to become a tax accountant. You graduated from school, became a tax accountant. You kind of moved up the ranks, a couple different companies there as a tax accountant. What was the path? What was the bridge from being a tax accountant to now I think I want to start a chain of seafood stores? Talk to me about that evolution.
So that's it's not a long story. So I left. I became a tax accountant. I was one of my first good jobs. I was a staff accountant for a couple of years, and then I eventually was hired as a corporate income tax auditor for the Florida Department of Revenue. So I worked at the Chicago Service Center. So what we did was we audited companies in the Midwest that did business in Florida. So I was there for about almost 5 years. But while I was there, there was a friend of mine who had a restaurant, a Chicago restaurant. It used to be about 15 or 16 locations before he bought it. But at one point he bought it. So when he bought that, and I was still keeping in contact with him. I was working for the Department of Revenue, and he was doing really well. So I was always a serial entrepreneur. So I always had that in my mind, like, maybe I'll bring that back to the West Side one day. But at the same time, I was working for the Florida, so I would fly out to Tallahassee and do a lot of training. And my wife, I'd be out there for 2 weeks at a time. My wife would come with me. So while we were there, we were both big foodies. So we would go to the different restaurants there, and we liked how they were doing it. They had like a different types of style, but they had like a few different seafoods. And then you can have it fried, you can have it grilled, you can have it blackened, you can have it steamed. And just to add to what we were saying earlier, like so one thing we do different at Surf's Up, we don't only fry everything. So a lot of our stuff can be grilled or blackened also. So we kind of like got that from them. You know what I mean? So my friend, he had a seafood restaurant. So originally I was gonna license his store and bring it back to on the West Side, because they had gone from like 14, 15 locations in the 80s down to one location when my friend bought it. So I was going to bring that back over to the area where I was from. And, and halfway through the conversation, my friend, we kind of wasn't seeing eye to eye. So I just decided and I'd already leased a store. I had bought equipment, talked to my wife about it. And then we both just decided, let's just do our own thing. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
So his concept was sort of the inspiration for you, kind of gave you the idea, the fuel for the fire. But to go from the idea to starting a restaurant on your own with, from what I'm understanding, no previous restaurant experience, that's a bit of a leap.
Yeah, it was a huge leap. And look, and at the time, I didn't realize how much of a leap it was, right? So now, 12 years later, I see it was a huge leap because. So how that happened was, so I decided with no experience, I trained at his restaurant maybe 2 or 3 days, and then I went shopping with him once or twice. And that was it. So when it was time for us to open, so we decided to come up with a name and everything. When it was get close to time for us to open, I knew that I had to hire someone that really was experienced in startups and things like that. So we posted a couple ads looking for employees. I found a guy, guy named Todd Jagow that wound up being like a godsend. You're interviewing people, and even before the interview, he basically sent me a menu. He sent me some sauces and a couple recipes. So he was really on top of it, and so we wound up hiring him, and then we wound up. And the crazy part, so we opened January 20th, 2012. We opened on a Friday. the crazy part is that it was a blizzard. It wound up being a blizzard. We're in Chicago, so it literally wound up being a blizzard. But we wound up doing really well. This was our first grand opening. We wound up doing really well. Todd was doing really well. I had a couple people that I knew, a couple young guys that I was kind of like mentoring, that I kind of brought in there. So I had had them working. Of course, when you first start off, you got everybody working. This was something I didn't know then, right? Then you look at your first couple payrolls, like, wow. So yeah, so so it started off and it took off really. I mean, it took off awesome, man. It couldn't have been better. And now the crazy part is, so when you're new to the restaurant business, you're about to open. People aren't going to want to rent you a space. You're brand new. They know the restaurant business is risky. They're not going to want to take a chance on you. So the location that I found was on the side of a Menards. Menards is like a Home Depot, like a large Home Depot store. It was a little small place on the side of Menards. It used to be, I mean, it was a few things over the years, but it hadn't been used in over 10 years. So, I had to come in there and clean it up. And, so that's, but see, what I didn't know is I was learning a lot about the process. This was my first store, but I was learning about the process. And this was in the west suburb of Hillside. So it's a pretty strict suburb. So, you were going to go by the law. So we had to eventually install fire alarm, sprinkler systems. We had to do a lot. So this was my first kind of like learning event. So I did all of this, right? My wife helped me financially. I took out money from me working at the Department of Revenue, and my mother helped me. So we came up probably about 70, 80 grand. Opened this location. It was crazy. January 20th, everything's going great. In September of the same year, Menards posted an ad in the local paper saying, after 20 years of business in this location, we're closing our doors. So, and this place used to be like the Hillside Mall, but it had been broken down to Menards. And this little small spot really was just an extension of Menards. And that's it. And there's like a CarMax like way down on another lot. So, of course, with Menards leaving, we're not going to survive. We have to leave. I mean, the parking lot was for like 2,000 spaces. You know what I mean? So, so that was like
you got a lot of your foot traffic from Menards with them shutting doors.
That as well. But not only that, when Menards left, it was a 2,000 space parking lot. The whole place was dark. You know what I mean? And not only that, the landlord, the property taxes that they had to pay for the space was 10 times what our rent was. So there was nothing we can do. So originally they were going to give us some relocation money to relocate, because they know that it wasn't nothing that we did. So they wanted us to itemize everything that we spent and everything. So we did that. They wound up just playing a waiting game with us, because they knew without Menards being there and it being dark and it kind of looked kind of desolate. You got one little small spot, and so they knew. So we played the waiting game with them, and they didn't give us any relocation money, but we eventually had to leave. So that was my first huge challenge, in the restaurant business.
And that was in the first year. That was just several months after you opened.
Man, in the first year. So all the money that we had put into it, everything pretty much gone. So so after that, so I was a little down. This was like November-ish that same year, 2012. A little down. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going back to the accounting game, right? So I applied to a few jobs. I get a few interviews, over the next few months. Don't get any of the jobs, but so that same 2012, that Christmas, we're doing like a family gathering type deal. How everybody gets together for Christmas, and we're all hanging out with my cousins and everything. And one of my cousins, he was like, "Boo, you got to keep going, don't you?" And I was, I didn't even know what he was talking about. I'm like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "That's how that type of thing go." He like, you open up your first store, it might close, it might blow up. Then he said, then you regroup, open up another one, and then he said that one might close. You regroup, open up another one again, and he was like, and then after you do that for about 6 or 7 years, people started to know you. You started to be known for it, and and then I thought about it. And I'm like, it made a lot of sense. So if I would have gotten a job during that little dark period from like November to March or April, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about this restaurant business. But so I was still looking for jobs. Didn't get the ones that I interviewed for. My wife, because she knew she runs a hair salon, so she's doing her thing, but I'm at home, twiddling my thumbs. So she's constantly looking for places. So, and she's always been good at this, man. She found a place which is really not too far from where we live on the west side of the city, just east of Oak Park. Pretty decent area, and the landlords were really fair. So she found and this was like a straight up godsend. So the landlord, they wanted, at the time, this was 2013, they wanted $2,500 a month for the rent. So they wanted 2 months security deposit and the first month rent. So that would have been $7,500. Now, also, this was a location that had been abandoned by someone else 6 months before. So the two owners, they really wasn't in the restaurant business. They had tried a restaurant before when they bought the building, didn't want to have anything to do with it. They really was trying to sell us the building, but we couldn't afford it at the time. So they was like, all the equipment that's here, because the last people abandoned it, they said, all the equipment that's here, you can have it, do whatever you want to do with it, throw it away. So I still had some equipment from the Hillside location. So $7,500 was kind of steep. So I convinced them, the landlords, let me give you the $5,000 security deposit, and let me get a month or two to clean the place up and get it right. And then I'll give you the $2,500 first month rent on the first day when we open. And then, and they was like, okay, cool. So I was able to scrap up $5,000, my wife and I, from family. We was able to kind of like just scrap that up and got the $5,000, signed the lease. Once we signed the lease and got the keys, we still had some equipment from the prior location. So we brought our stuff from the prior location. And what we didn't know at the beginning, we found out in the backyard of the new location, there was a container, like the back of a truck, like a container. And we had the keys.
Like a shipping container.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. We opened that up, and this thing is filled with restaurant equipment. I mean, like garbage equipment, though. Like garbage stuff broken up, pretty much garbage equipment.
Nothing usable.
Well, it was maybe one or two things that was usable. We didn't need it anyway. But what we were able to do was take this equipment. Now, at the same time, I had a cousin, and our cousin, he did a lot of recycling. That's what his job was. He had like a recycling company. So he would do like trash outs for the banks, for foreclosed houses, because, the whole foreclosure thing was still going on. So he was able to take some of the restaurant equipment and everything and take it and scrap that. And then we sold some stuff, scrapped some stuff. And we wound up, from that restaurant equipment and signing this lease, we wound up coming up with like close to $10,000. So we took this $10,000 and now we bought our signage and painted the place and started to build it up. So the moral of the story is I was able to make money by going into this location. I made it $5,000 and I used all of that. So because I pulled the 5 from family, signed the lease, was able to get 10 from selling all the scrap metal and everything and the scrap equipment, and then was able to trade a couple of things with a few restaurant equipment company and was able to find. So I wound up on the top, just really off of nothing. And then we opened this store in 2013 around Memorial Day. And it kind of like went gangbuster from the start. It's like everything's going great, but still some challenges ahead. So so we was there for about for a full year, got to about a year and a half. And so the following year, 2014, because just like I said, everything was going great. We had a friend that had already inquired about, maybe opening up one of the same thing. And then at the same time, my sister's fiance, he was really interested in it, because he has been at the one in Hillside. People are just watching you. Sometimes people are watching you don't even know it. And so they were both interested. And so I'd already told my sister and her fiance, and they decided to do one. So now I'm on the west side of Chicago. Her fiance is from the South Shore area, which is on the south side. So they went. So basically in 2014, he opened one August 1st on the south side, my sister's fiance. And then a good friend of ours, he opened one in Maywood, which is another west suburb. So now, 2014, we had 3 locations. So
and were these franchises or were these like your partners?
Well, they were licensees basically at the beginning, because we hadn't registered to sell franchises. So my sister, they said I was like a franchise, because that was my sister and her fiance. That's basically her spot. That was her spot. So she wasn't giving me anything, but my friend, my other friend, he was actually giving me a basically like a little royalty fee. And so then we had the 3 stores. So, and I'm still running it, but now, so I still didn't know a whole lot about the restaurant business. I'm still learning. So food costs, like just the unit economics weren't all the way there. So, I mean, anybody that's in the restaurant business know the margins are really small. So if you're running, I mean, you could do $1 million a year. And if you have those numbers off a little bit, I mean, you'll be spending $1 million too. You know what I mean? So, but the moral of the story is that, so things were still a little tough. You know what I mean? For my wife and I, with her doing her thing as a businesswoman with the beauty salon, and then me doing my thing now with the restaurant. So the opportunity cost became too much. So, and I like the licensing thing. So I was looking to eventually start franchising. So also in 2014, I applied for the trademark for Surf's Up with the USPTO because I wanted to do the franchising. But so what I wound up doing, the location that I was in, I wound up selling that location to another person that wanted to, get involved in Surf's Up. So he came in. This person had more, a lot more money than I did. So I sold it to him, and I was going to go back to work as an accountant because the opportunity cost was too much. I'm doing, 90 grand as an accountant, and but I'm just not really clearing 90 grand running the restaurant. So I sold the store to him, but it was supposed to be a Surf's Up franchise, but he remodeled it. And after he remodeled it, he decided to call it something else. It didn't really make me any difference, but I still had the other two stores. So at that time, I went back to work as an accountant. About a year later, I got an office action letter from the USPTO saying that I couldn't get the trademark. So I'm like, oh, wow. Because, I really had my heart set on the franchising. At the time, my sister's restaurant was going and our friend's restaurant was going. But I was working I was back in working as an accountant at US Cellular. And I was there for a while, but that gave me some time to kind of recoup, build my credit back up, you know what I mean? Catch up on some bills. I was back, doing that for about almost 4 years. And about 4 years. So they told me I couldn't get the trademark. So, and I didn't have the money to really, and I felt I was a smart guy. So I did my little research, and it was a company in Virginia Beach that does shaved ice, and their name was Surf's Up. But I did my homework on the USPTO. I did my research and everything, and I saw that they were class 35, which was shaved ice confectionaries, and my class was class 43, which was restaurant services. So I appealed to the USPTO, and I added that in there, and I'm just going about my business. I would still help my friend, and I would help my sister, and I was very involved in their stores also. So we would have meetings and stuff, and I was staying on top of it. And in 2017, like toward mid to late 2017, I found out that I was going to get awarded the trademark. I found out they were going to publish me in the official Gazette, and if there was no objection in 30 days, then I would get the trademark registered. So when that happened, that kind of like burned the fire up under me, and that so I'm like, now okay, I'm about to get this trademark. I can get my franchise. I can get back to what I was doing, and so me and my wife, we're back on top of it. The next year, my wife, just like I said, she was good at this, found another location, which was right by a house in Oak Park. So we live in Oak Park, which is the first west suburb off of the city. So it's a walking distance to city limits. So we opened, so this was going to be our pilot location. We were going to use it to sell franchises and everything. So April 20th, 2018, we opened the store in Oak Park. So now, and this place, I mean, the grand opening just went crazy. I mean, we had it decorated. We were able to get it looking really nice before it was open. So I mean, it just went crazy. I mean, it straight from the beginning went really well. So now I had 3 stores, and so fast forward to 2018, we're just doing our thing. Towards the end of 2018, we were featured on a TV show in Chicago on WGN called Chicago's Best. So Chicago's Best was a really, really popular show then. It's not out anymore, but they had like a 10-year run, but it was really popular then. They featured us on Chicago's Best, so things were just getting better and better. So 2019, we licensed 2 more locations, one in Romeoville and one in Bronzeville. So we licensed.
You're
2
still
more
doing
locations.
licenses at this point,
right? Still doing licenses. Okay. So this is 2019. So when we licensed these 2, plus we had the other 3. Now we were able to, because by this time I left my job at US Cellular. But now we were able to, because, franchising costs a lot of money, right? So, I mean, like FDDs, franchise agreements, registrations, operations manual. I mean, this stuff is $100,000 easily. So, so that's why we were pretty much licensing, because we really couldn't afford $100,000 to put towards franchising. So by this time, 2019, we had made the money to through franchise, license fees and things like that. We had enough money, and I'd been working at U.S. Sailor. The new restaurant was going well. We had enough money to start the process. So, we started the process piece by piece. We did, did the ops manual. We were working on that. We had to do the FDDs, franchise agreement, then the registrations. So at the end of 2019, we sold an additional 7 stores.
Wow. That happened fast.
Yeah, and this was just my wife and I. We didn't have any sales organization, anything. So, but see, during 2019, when we did these grand openings, we would, internet, social media was getting kind of popular. So we were putting this stuff on social media. And everybody was seeing it. Everybody wanted to be involved. So we did 2 stores in 2019. We sold 7 additional stores other than the 2 that we opened. So we had 5. Then 2020, we know the pandemic hit. So at the time the pandemic hit,
it's tough.
Yeah, it was crazy because I had to. Well, I basically made an executive decision. We were going to continue to stay open. We went from having the dine in to no dine in. We actually wound up really excelling in that sense. But we had 7 stores that were under development that we hadn't opened yet, hadn't found locations or anything. So that proved to be good for some of our new people because they were able to get favorable lease deals. What our highest grossing store is our Aurora store. They did 1.3 million last year. But they have a really, really favorable lease because they signed it in like April of 2020.
But nobody wanted these leases, right?
Exactly, because people, they really didn't know what was going to happen. So, but one thing that hurt us with it. So, well, I guess it kind of hurt us, but we learned from it. So we weren't able to do the grand openings anymore, because you got to be 6 feet apart. So that's when we started doing kind of soft openings. We started doing soft openings and kind of like gradually opening. So we gradually opened all of those 7 stores. And it took time, right? So I put an end to the franchise because I was trying to get those stores open and also go into support mode for just our whole group of stores that we had. I felt like I couldn't add any more onto that at the time. So I focused on that, and we did that for a few years. So, and then a lot of stuff started coming from the pandemic. Started getting the third-party apps and stuff started getting real big, and then the technology came in, and now it's a big AI thing. So they started throwing curveballs at me all type of ways. So I'm constantly trying to adapt, and even up to this day, we're still adapting. But as a result of some of the and I was still learning myself as well, right? So a couple of locations we got wasn't the best location. A couple of them wound up being great locations, just like the one that did the 1.3 million. But like for instance, my guy that had the original one location that wasn't my sister, he had already been in business a while, so he talked to a shopping mall. They were giving them favorable rent, tenant improvement, and everything. But the person that owned that shopping mall owned 3 other shopping malls. So he felt like he can do all 3 of those, and they were going to give him tenant improvement for all of it. But to make a long story short, we ultimately had to close those stores. Mm-hmm. We had to close those, and then we had 2 ghost kitchens, cloud kitchens that we had. One in the South Loop area and one in Avondale area in the city.
And explain what a cloud kitchen is for people who don't know, Eric.
Okay, so a cloud kitchen is like a huge warehouse where they have like 30 to 40, 200 to 400 square feet kitchens, and they all operate off. So the thing is, you pay them one fee, and then you pay at that time you paid a fee for the runners to come and get the food and bring it to the front. And then other than that, they would handle the garbage. They had refrigeration space, they had freezer space, they would have the towel service, the aprons, but you paid them, maybe $4 or $5 grand a month, and that was it. So you didn't have the utilities and none of the other stuff that comes with a restaurant. But the downside to that is that it was all third-party apps, all third-party delivery apps. So if you don't really know how to navigate those third-party delivery apps correctly, that can really get you in a funny situation. because although it looks attractive, but if you're paying 30% here, and so so it wasn't as attractive. Eventually, that we found to know that it wasn't as good as we thought it was. So we end up closing those three, and the three mall stores and the two cloud kitchens, which brought us back to the 7 stores. And then we recently got a store that we just opened in Forest Park that that's kind of like with the bar and everything that we're working on now. And that kind of like brought us to this point now.
So thanks for sharing that story, Eric, because there's so many twists and turns that I think really highlights your resiliency, how adaptive you are, the scrappiness. And I really appreciate you sharing a lot of those ups and downs, because I think people who would just come and see you now and see Eric Roy, he's got, 8 locations, like, well, this guy knows what he's doing. He's got it figured out. Like, he was probably just born this way. He was born to lead, born to do this. And they, a lot of people wouldn't have known this challenging path that you took to get here. All of the pivots that you had to make along the way, the number of times that you either gave up or were close to giving up, thought you were walking away, went back to work in another industry, had to sell scrap metal out of the back of the trailer, so you could fund the renovation. It's a really impressive story. So
it was serious.
So here's where we are now. You've got 8 locations. You've got the franchise documents in place. The franchise opportunity is available to folks. What does the franchise opportunity look like? What geographies are you looking for?
Okay,
talk to us about that.
Okay, so the only geography that we're not looking for is the Chicago area. Because I feel like we have 8 locations here, and anything that we do here is probably going to be myself or my family. I'm working on a couple things with the airports, trying to get into O'Hare Airport, and also working on some of the arenas in Chicago, trying to get to like United Center, Soldier Field, things of that nature. So all territories are available. Of course, we're looking at Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, California, because we're looking at we might have something going on in Wilmington, Delaware. It's like a beach type area over there. Because, of course, by the name being Surf's Up, we're trying to, of course, hit the places where you're on the coast. We're trying to be by the water, even though it's funny how I started here in Chicago where, we got the lake here, but not a whole lot of surfing. Although some people do surf. Cause now I've seen people with like the big boards, like I think they like boogie boards or something. I don't know, but
big paddle boards.
Yeah, but they look like big surfboards. So, they have people they're doing, and you have some people that surf out here in the wintertime. I don't know how they manage to do it, but, but you have some people that get in a wetsuit and actually do it. But so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for really trying to focus on multi-unit restaurant operators. You know what I mean? But, of course, a great candidate, we're going to, kind of like really do our due diligence and try to get really good people to work with, but we're focusing on multi-unit operators. I think we're looking for a liquid $250,000, a net worth of about $750,000. I'm trying to think what else.
What about the personality type? What kind of a person are you looking to work with as a franchisee?
So hopefully looking for leaders. I'm looking for people that has restaurant business experience. Hopefully, if not, definitely have business experience. And I'm looking for people that sure themselves. You know what I mean? I don't really want anybody, I don't want to convince a person to buy a franchise that's on the fence. You know what I mean? I want him because if he's on the fence, then that's a indication that he may not do so well, and I want somebody that understands that this is a franchise and there's a way of doing things. You know what I mean? You can't just go and just, switch up and just change the menu or do this. Understand that it's a group team and it's a group effort. Somebody that understands the whole thing, like, you go far, you go together, you go alone, you go what do you say? You go fast, you go alone. You want to go far, you go together. Somebody that kind of understands that concept. I want to be a part of a franchise. In the past we've had people that come on and during the what they call like the honeymoon period, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do everything correct, man. Because they see us doing well, like I see you guys doing, man. We want to do everything exact, and then they open, and then right after that, they saying, they like their mother's greens better than the recipe of greens that we have. things like that. You know what I mean? Things that you have to work through. But us doing this for a while, and we've been able to kind of really learn from just from there were times that we didn't get like I was telling you earlier, that we didn't get the best real estate. It was times that we really didn't get the best franchisee. It was times that we brought people into the business that really didn't have enough capital to successfully do it. You know what I mean? Now we've had hit or misses with that also, because the downside to it is I was kind of teaching people to do it the way I did it. And and you heard my story, so I bootstrapped it, and I was showing people how to do it. People that otherwise would have never had an opportunity to open a restaurant. You know what I mean? It seems like this big giant that's unattainable, but I learned that there's more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, I've seen places that wasn't doing well, and you can go in there, you know what I mean, and talk to them and be like, man, let me come in and partner with you, or let me take over the operation and switch the name and everything. So, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And, and then going into these second generation spaces, where it's not going to cost you, a whole lot of money. But sometimes those second generation spaces are second generation just because of that, because they didn't bring in enough revenue, to keep going, successfully.
So generally when somebody is considering a new franchise that they want to purchase, they're looking at multiple opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
What's the benefit of Surf's Up? What do they get with Surf's Up that they may not be getting somewhere else?
Okay, so one of the things I think you get a benefit when you get with Surf's Up is that, so you heard my story, so you know the story of resilience, and I'm not the most established franchise out there, right? Because just like you said, you have a lot of options. So for one thing, we can do it for less money. The obvious, we can do it for less money, but we've been in the game for 12 years, which is really good. But also, so this is what I had mentioned in the last few years. I've, last few years, I started to go a lot of conferences, really started to hone my skills and do a lot of networking. So I've basically, while doing that, I've gained a network of advisors and mentors of like real industry veterans that are supporting me 100%, that have done it before. You know what I mean? And that's really been crucial in our growth from going to where we were before the pandemic, when we, just was franchising, just doing our own thing, to actually going to these conferences, learning from others, meeting with others, networking with others. So that really brings, and it brings credibility for one, but also, it takes a village to actually do this and to do this correctly. And, I borrowed that from one of my somewhat mentors, but he helps me a lot, advisor, Sam Stanovich. He's one of the senior VPs up at Big Chicken at Shaq's brand. So I borrowed that little tag from him, but it really does take a village, man. And I did this thing about 7 years, kind of like just bumping my head. My wife and I just on our own. And then at that point, once I saw how it really had legs and it could really grow, as far as, you could do 500 stores one day, I knew I needed to get some help. So I started to do a lot of networking and everything. And then also I'm a genuine person. And I'm a genuine person, that's one. And what I think is really important is that there's not a lot of big guys when it comes to seafood. You see what's happening to Red Lobster. Something similar is happening to Long John Silver. Something similar has happened with Long John Silver. I don't know about bankruptcy or anything, but I know they've closed hundreds of stores. I know Captain D's, they're not in Chicago. They're like southeast, but I think they're doing pretty good. But it's a lot of room. You know what I mean? It's a lot of room for someone to come in and kind of like sneak in. And one minute you don't see me, and now you see me everywhere. And I think it's a huge opportunity. And we're doing it a little different than how it's been done. No disrespect to Long John Silver, I love them, but one of the things we did different, we have 3 proprietary seasoning blends. One for our shellfish, and this is for the fried stuff. One for our shellfish, one for the wings, and then we have one for our regular fish. And the reason we did that, we have 3 different distinct tastes. That's, like I said, no disrespect to Long John Silver. I used to love Long John Silver, but then, as you get older, you realize everything tastes the same. The shrimp, the cod, whatever you got, it all tastes the same because it's all like the same batter. And I didn't want that for Surf's Up. And then I wanted to make sure we had proprietary blends. So we have a flavor that you can't, I'm sure somebody can recreate it at some point, but it's not like a typical flavor. We're not just going to, the grocery store and buying a bag of seasoned flour and throwing it on there. When we first started, just to show you our evolution, we first started, we were doing all of our sauces in house. We were making like we have a remoulade sauce, hot and spicy, honey garlic, pineapple soy, our tartar sauce, our cocktail sauce, because we thought to be authentic and make all the stuff in house, it was going to be better. And it was. And the flavor was great, everything. But as we started to scale and started to add additional stores, I saw that it was becoming like overwhelming to when we were training some of these new franchisees, because they're making all these sauces. And then we started, okay, so cocktail and tartar, we can buy that. You know what I mean? So we started to kind of make it easier for our new operators and also for our new operator staff. We started off with manual deep fryers, where you gotta, and if you know anything about if anybody in the audience knows anything about the manual deep fryers, you have to filter those fryers maybe once, sometimes even twice a day, and change the oil. That's a dangerous job, and it's a labor-intensive job. So as we grew and evolved, we started getting the henny penny fryers that filter themselves. That kind of like takes a lot of the stress off the employees' back. Try to make it easier. We took a couple things off the menu, things like we would have shrimp and grits. They would be great at the corporate store, but then at the other store, they wasn't tasting exactly the same. So, just really making it as simple and scalable as possible, so that, basically anybody in there can almost run any position in there.
You guys have experimented with a lot of different things. You've found what's worked. You've moved away from things that were too labor intensive, too challenging, too difficult, and you found smoother, easier, faster, more efficient ways to do them.
Right.
Eric, you mentioned some of the unique flavors that you guys have developed, and that's a big differentiator from some of the other seafood experiences out there. Let's talk a little bit more about the customer experience. What are some other things that a customer notices when they come into a Surf's Up establishment? What's their ambiance? What's their experience like?
So I think and I say it, one thing and I'm really big on this, man, is that we're really inclusive. You know what I mean? To everyone. I mean, we have every now and then we'll have like a karaoke at one of the stores. I mean, if you look at the audience, I mean, you have people from all backgrounds, but everybody, feeling good spirited, good mood people. I mean, it's a place of inclusion. So, you're going to feel comfortable no matter who you are. And, and we really try to pick people that, as far as our staff, especially like the front of the house people that's really customer facing, we really try to pick people that's going to do exactly that. And we're serious about that. I mean, if you look at our reviews, on Google, Yelp, that's going to reflect that. It's going to reflect that. I mean, that's one thing. And then you're gonna smell the aroma when you come in there. I mean, you're gonna smell the food. It's gonna make you hungry when you come in. Even when you're out on the outside, sometimes when you got the hood blowing and everything, you're gonna smell it. So you're gonna smell the food. You're gonna have some good music, not crazy, wow. No, nothing offensive. You're gonna have some good music, not loud like that, at a nice tone. People are gonna be having conversations. You're going to have some community activists. You're going to have people from all walks of life. You might have a guy in a suit sitting there on his laptop. And it's just a really, really, really good experience. I mean, I've sat there with one of the guys. He was Barack Obama's doctor, and another politician. I sat there and talked to them, and they just really love it. They love it. They love the vibe that's there. But you got people from all walks of life that come in. And we treat everybody equally, and we treat everybody fairly,
I like that. Eric, are there specific mentors or books that have been particularly helpful to you in your career path?
Yeah, so one book my mother, she always makes me read, because it's tough being an entrepreneur and sticking to it, is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell.
I love that book.
Yeah, so she always, because and it talks about how like the hush puppies and how you can struggle until all of a sudden it tips, now it's like going viral or something. So that's always, and then, talks about how, when things are the worst, that's when you should really start to, get anxious and start to celebrate, because, something is coming. And, just showing how, you can be a week away from, a phone call that changed your life, so you got to keep going. I say, as far as books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that kind of influenced me younger, in my younger times, because that, kind of just showing how, rather than being an accountant and just, because, I saw a long time ago, I could have kept my first accounting job and stayed there and worked there 30, 40 years and had a great life, had a great life. But what I couldn't do there is really create generational wealth where I would be able to, eventually bring my family in and kind of like, and I couldn't be an example of something for a lot of these people in the community that only don't have those positive role models. They see police, firemen, lawyers, and doctors. You know what I mean? That, in the hood, that's all you really see as far as, for the most part, as far as powerful. Things are changing a lot now. But back in the day, that's kind of, that was it. So, if you weren't trying to be one of those things, lawyers, you're going to see the lawyers because somebody in your family more than likely has gone to prison. So something about that. Doctors, you go to the doctor as a child. So that's when you're kind of like getting out of your comfort zone. You're going to the doctor. And then police and firemen, which is, and all of those are great professions. But, I was, to someone to be able to say, I want to be a businessman. I want to be a restaurant owner, and to be able to see someone that looks like you that did it, and even to go farther and say, okay, this guy grew up where I grew up, and that did it. And then, of course, I still got family in the area and I still go back. But for them to see that, I think I'm really proud of that.
I think you should be. Your story is a powerful example of resiliency.
Thanks.
Terrific.
Thank you, man.
Eric, I just have one more question for you. But before I do it, I want to do two things. If you're listening today and you like today's content, please hit the subscribe, like, or share button on your favorite podcast app. Eric, I also want to tell people, what's the best way to get in touch with you? They're listening to you. They like your story. Maybe they're interested in a franchise. How do they connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me via email at ericroyjr@surfsupfranchising.com. So that's Eric Roy Jr. at surfsupfranchising.com. You can go to our website, www.surfsupdivein.com. And we have a franchise page on there that you can kind of like link there. And you can also contact, we just did a launch call with the franchise consulting company actually yesterday, because we just relaunched our franchise program after going through the few years when I stopped. We just relaunched this year and got updated FDDs and everything. So we're ready to go. We just launched with the franchise consulting company. So you can also reach out to my consultant there, Richard Morgan, call him Rick Morgan. And he's a consultant at the franchise consulting company. And he's going to be working with us with our franchise development and everything.
That's terrific. Okay, Eric, last question for you. I'm curious, how do you see your business evolving in the next 5 years? What do you think some of the biggest changes that are coming are?
Now they got the whole AI thing, right? And there's so much technology out there, you know what I mean? You got to kind of like learn how to kind of wiggle your way through the technology. So as far as my business, as far as like the micro side, Surfs Up, I see us growing in the next 5 years to 100 locations, you know what I mean, minimum. I see us expanding into different markets in the United States and possibly overseas as well. I've been talked to a guy out in Australia not too long ago, and Canada. So I see us expanding into other markets, 100 stores minimum in the next 5 years. But as far as the industry as a whole, I feel like the industry is still trying to recover from the pandemic. So I feel like it's kind of going to draw back because, people have been kind of complaining about the pricing because of the inflation. Prices shot up. They're talking about, fast food, is higher than casual dining now, and you got people like Applebee's, Chili's that, you can actually go get a $10 meal deal at Applebee's and sit down and eat. And, a Big Mac meal costs $15, so I think it's going to be some correction in the industry. I think things went kind of crazy and still going kind of crazy. A lot of stores closed and a lot of big restaurants, a lot of household names closing, especially here in Chicago. But I see a correction in the industry. So I swear I have, I'm really optimistic about the future of the food and beverage industry and the restaurant industry. I think it's going to be some great things happening, great expansion, great deals. I think it's going to be some newcomers that are going to take the spots of like Red Lobster and Long John Silver and, some of the big guys. So I got a pretty optimistic outlook.
That's terrific. Hey, Eric, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for bringing me on, Anthony. It helps me also, man, to kind of like get the story out and just to think about it and just to discuss it. You'd be surprised, the amount of satisfaction you get from talking about your story and kind of putting it into perspective. So
well, good. It was
thank you.
You're welcome. It was a two-way street. I'm glad
Right.
you enjoyed telling the story because I enjoyed bringing it out of you.
Right.
So
Right.
It was mutually beneficial. Well, folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.